For more on the conditions around the world, I sat down earlier with Scott Nova, Executive Director of the Workers Rights Consortium, and asked him about the worst conditions that workers have to face.
The biggest problems workers face in the industry now are unsafe factories. We've seen hundreds of workers die in preventable disasters in Bangladesh. Sub-poverty wages that don't even provide enough money for people to feed their children, as low as 30 cents an hour in places like Bangladesh and Burma. And long hours of forced overtime, sometimes till the early hours of the morning if there's a delivery deadline to meet, that puts a tremendous physical burden on workers. And there are other problems as well, of course.
I can see a lot of people to blame here, but I'm going to ask you, who's to blame? The regulators, the factory owners, the workers perhaps, if they're not speaking up enough or organized often enough. There must be a lot of blame to go around, right?
Well, the responsible parties, of course, are the people with the power in the production system. The people with the most power in the system are the big brands and retailers in North America and Europe who place the orders at the factories and decide if the factories succeed or fail. That's not to exonerate the factory managers. It's not to defend the failure of local governments to regulate properly. But at the end of the day, the brands and retailers in North America and Europe are getting exactly what they pay for. They're getting incredibly low prices, incredibly fast delivery, and workers end up paying the price for it.
What about government regulators? Well, each country has its own set of regulators, whether you're the fire regulation person or the factory regulation person. Aren't they responsible for ensuring that it's a safe working environment?
They're absolutely responsible for doing that, and they don't. And it's important to understand the reasons why, and those are two. The factory owners in a given country often have tremendous political power, and they don't want to be regulated, and they use their power to resist government efforts to regulate. But also, the governments understand, just like the factory owners understand, that the reason the Walmarts and the Gaps are in their country in the first place is because it's cheap. And the governments believe that if they did regulate aggressively, the brands and retailers would move to another country where there's less regulation. And the fact is, they have good reason to fear that, because over time, the brands and retailers have consistently moved toward the lowest cost countries, even though that means lower wages and worse working conditions.
So it used to be parts of America, then it was parts of Japan, then it was parts of Vietnam and China, and now we're talking about places like Bangladesh, India, perhaps, we might even throw that name into the mix as well.
Right.
But when you say the lowest cost denominator, somebody's investing in these factories. Can't we tell the person who's saying, here's the check to build this factory, can't that person, that investor, do a better job of saying, I want to build a safe factory?
Look, the brands and retailers, if they wanted to do so, could compel factory owners and managers to operate in a safe and responsible fashion. It would cost them more. Prices would be modestly higher, delivery would be modestly slower. The brands and retailers have made a choice to make fast delivery and low prices a more important priority than the safety of workers and the conditions under which they work.
No question about it, you want the brands to do more. Let me give you a couple case studies. Nike, they were accused a while back, granted, and they said they made changes. They sent people to monitor the factories. Apple went through something very similar as well. That's in the last few years. They said they would send inspectors to the factories to make sure that the working conditions weren't in any potential violation of their own company morals or ethics. Does that public opinion and that public scrutiny, has that helped make factories safer or better?
The fear of Nike and other big brands that public disgust over sweatshop conditions overseas would damage the image and reputation of the brand is the one thing that has driven change in the industry. The problem is the brands are also very good at public relations. And while conditions have improved only modestly over the years in the industry, the brands have been able to convince a lot of people that the greatest problems are solved, change is afoot, and that they're making an earnest and effective effort to do right by workers.
What about the consumers? The consumer who goes and buys the goods that may or may not be made in bad, I don't want to accuse all the factories of being bad, but I suspect that if I were to ask Walmart, one of the answers they might give is that, well, consumers want these products at these prices, therefore we have to buy it from these type of factories. And again, I'm not accusing them of saying that they're bad factories, but they're going to say, well, it's hard to monitor 20,000 factories.
No consumer has ever called up a retailer or a brand and said, you know, I really like your products, but I want you to make them 5% cheaper, and I don't care who you have to kill in order to do it. Consumers do not want goods made in sweatshops. Most consumers would gladly pay a bit more if they could know as a result that they were getting goods made by workers who were treated fairly, but the brands and retailers never offer them that choice.
5 years from now, what will we be talking about? Are things going to be better, or do you think with all this intense competition between places like Bangladesh and Indonesia and a number of other countries that they're going to compete, which means they're going to go for the lowest cost even further, which means conditions in theory could be even worse?
The underlying dynamics you're describing aren't going away, and so it's going to be an enormous uphill battle. But brands and retailers do face real danger in terms of their reputation and image. And if we can use that to persuade them to sign enforceable agreements with people who represent the interests of workers, agreements between the brands and labor unions globally, under which the brands have to invest in their factories to make them safe, to improve the conditions, to raise the wages, then we have a chance to see true reform in the industry.